guess we'll get started. Welcome to our session. Going to look at our experiences migrating our Caché application portfolio to InterSystems IRIS. So I'm Matt Giesmann. I'm an application developer on the application services team at InterSystems.
And I'm Harry Huang. I'm a technical specialist in application service team.
Yeah, so in this session, we're going to just kind of walk through our mindset as we've approached our migrations, moving our portfolio to IRIS. We'll start with how we prepare, just kind of the mindset going in. We'll walk through a specific example of an application that we migrated from Ensemble to IRIS. And then we will go through some examples of how we worked through issues that came up. For the most part, our migrations were very smooth, but things did come up, so hopefully we can give you an idea of how we worked through those. Just a quick snapshot of what our team has done. We've migrated about 40 total instances to IRIS. 11 applications across 9 different instances, and this includes production environments as well as our dev, test, build, things like that. Our migrations, we started from as early as Ensemble 2016-1, and we've just been targeting the most recent versions of IRIS available as we've gone. Operating systems as early as Windows Server 2008, Red Hat 6, targeting Windows Server 2019 and Red Hat 7. So just out of curiosity, who is running their applications on Ensemble and Caché only with no IRIS? Is that great? Anyone in the middle of migrations? A mix? Yeah. All right, so getting started. Why migrate to IRIS at all? Why go to the hassle? For our team, the biggest example, or the biggest reason really is just generally better support, being up to date with InterSystems technology, all the latest bug fixes and so on, better interface with our support department, which hopefully you are familiar with, as well as integration with operating systems, third-party technologies, things like that. Security enhancements across the board. Some of this is as simple as the latest TLS implementations and things like that. We don't have any performant critical apps, but just generally happy with getting the latest performance improvements in IRIS, as well as new features, especially as we look forward to new development on our application suite. Things like embedded Python are exciting for future uses.
All right, so before we actually do the migration, we always have a brainstorm session to discuss about some considerations. And here we will divide them into 3 levels: application level, Caché IRIS instance level, and operating systems level. We will have several slides to discuss about them later. And after all of those, we will chart the path for migration. So first one, application considerations. We will ask ourselves, what feature might be affected by conversion? Does our app use any localization? Does it use CSP or Zen? And an important question is, does our app use any legacy technology? Zen module is a good example. It was shipped with Caché a few years ago, but now in IRIS, it's not there by default. So if the application uses Zen module, and we may need to download it from WRC individually. So we consider about web server. When we do the migration, we need to think about the supported versions. I believe in the latest version of IRIS, it only supports Apache 2.4 and IIS 7. So if we have an application running on like Apache 2.2 or IIS6, then we might need to upgrade the web server as well. And then we also need to upgrade the CSP gateway to the new web gateway. If our application has connectivity with other application, we might need to update ODBC or JDBC drivers on each system. And most of our application has multiple environments. That means we have development, testing, and production. And it's unrealistic to upgrade all of them at the same time. So we need to figure out a way to ensure the code compatibility. And finally, we will ask ourselves, what type of license key do we need? Should it be user-based or should it be core-based? And second layer, instance considerations. There is a great documentation called How to Migrate to InterSystems IRIS. And in that documentation, there's a table. It shows all the supported paths from a Caché or Ensemble to IRIS. So before we do the migration, we need to think about it and look at the table to see if it's supported.
Yeah, so our final category of consideration just revolve around the operating system. So you can see here some of the relevant versions for our team on Windows. Yeah, the big question here is, does your current operating system support your target version of IRIS? For our Red Hat hosted instances, we have a table as well. Yeah, and beyond, if you will need an OS upgrade prior to your IRIS conversion, this is the time to think about if that can be in place, what considerations your tech group might have in place, whether that can be done in place or not. So with these things in mind, we charted our path for migration. Can we directly convert IRIS right where our current application lives? That's great. Hopefully that's the case. Perhaps we need to first do an OS upgrade, followed by an IRIS conversion. Or do we actually need to start with a brand new VM, followed by our IRIS migration? If that's the case, can we make the jump both OS and IRIS at once, or do we, for some reason, need to do a horizontal migration to Ensemble or Caché before we do our IRIS migration? Yeah, in listing these, our team has found each of them to be the right choice for various apps for various reasons. Okay.
All right, so enough brainstorming, and let's look at some real-life example. We recently migrate one of our application to IRIS, and we will follow the big picture or the 3 layers big picture we just discussed before. So the first one is application level considerations. This application, it interacts with OS extensively, which means it interacts with file system and it calls OS executables. So that means when we do the migration, we need to think about OS version and OS details. This is a mature system, but it's also actively developed with multiple environments. So as we discussed before, we need to figure out a way to ensure code compatibility. And it has dependent technologies. So once we did the migration, and we need to think about, do we need to upgrade all those dependent technology as well? And it has connections both to and from other applications. So ODBC or JDBC connections, drivers might need to be updated. And on instance level, this was running on Ensemble 2018.1.4. At the time we did the migration, the latest IRIS kit was IRIS 2020.1.1. So that was our target. And looking at the table we just showed before, from Ensemble 2018 to IRIS 2020.1, it's supported. So we have no problem. And then on OS level, it was running on Red Hat 6, and we want it to be on Red Hat 7. But our IT department has a limitation or restriction that we couldn't do in-place upgrade from Red Hat 6 to Red Hat 7. So in that case, that means we need to build a new Red Hat 7 VM, and it also means we need to build an instance from scratch on a new VM. Okay, so armed with all those information, we can determine our migration process. It can be 2 steps. Step 1, we need to install a new, or we need to build a new Red Hat 7 VM. And in that VM, we need to build a new, brand new Ensemble 2018.1. And then step 2, we will do in-place upgrade from Ensemble 2018.1 to IRIS 2020.1.
So in step 1 on that, you would migrate, you would copy the DATs from old VM to new VM, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so looking at the OS migration for this, yeah, this isn't technically IRIS conversion, but yeah, for our team, this was probably the largest time investment. I'm sure for you that could be the case as well. Yeah, so to highlight a few things, yeah, from our tech team, we got a new Red Hat installation. We installed Ensemble. In this case, we were going horizontal to match the old system. And then we could go about installing the app and its dependencies. So a few things to highlight from that. We use the convention of having a code and data database, as well as mapping our configuration application config to a third database. This is great on your conversion to just be able to swap in a new test database, rebuild your app, or bring in a new config without clobbering things. We, of course, use source control and change control, so that's how we configured that and brought down the application and built it. And because we were going horizontal Ensemble to the same version, we could export our old security settings and bring them in, so we knew we were starting with something that had been in place. So at this point, installing external dependencies. The big thing to highlight here is web server, because these were apps that had been along for a long time. We were on Apache 2.2, so now was the time we made the upgrade to Apache 2.4. So just going through the process of making sure that our standard configuration for that was up to snuff for everything that we needed. Installing things, we were using an early version of InterSystems reports, so that was something we had to do. This application interfaced extensively with Perforce, so yeah, since this was Linux, just being mindful of file permissions, things like that, and going through connectivity, things like ODBC. Yeah, so once we had our application installed, built, we could go through to testing, validating the application there, both manual and automated unit tests, and then we could clone that new application forward to our test and live environments. And so our go live window was consisted really of just copying over that .dat, copying over any flat files from the operating system that the application depended on, and doing our cutover for users.
So on that one,
Yeah.
real quick, because this is my life right now. One thing that we found doing the RHEL 6 or RHEL 7 or any OS upgrade, what we've actually done is we stand up a secondary server and we'll call it 02 instead of 01. And then we'll install, get everything migrated over to that.
Yeah.
We'll shut down the original 01, and then we'll rename the server 02 to 01. So that way there is no DNS cutover. It just magically appears.
Okay.
Now RHEL 7 box instead of the RHEL 6 box.
Yeah, I guess I couldn't speak to the better approach because the responsibility would fall to the tech team. Yeah. In general, we were able to kind of configure our
We got to go through this about 7 times.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there could definitely be, that could definitely be better for your case. We can talk more about that. Yeah.
after you thought that your application was installed, what do you use to install? It's Python, Bash, it's object scripting. How you install your application inside IRIS or what's the name?
Yeah, some details on that. Our applications, we use CCR, which if that's available, it's a change control layer on top of source control. So we can do just a refresh call that both syncs source code and goes through the build process. So we have things like, for example, we need Angular builds to be kicked off in addition to compiling the object script code. So our change control layer allows us to do that automatically. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Your environment is on premises, or
Yes.
on cloud?
Yes.
On premises.
Yeah.
Your customers, they all have your application installed.
Yeah, in our case, all our apps are hosted on premises. Yeah.
And you compile your classes.
Yes.
Classes for these mechanisms,
CCR is our mechanism for change control, yeah.
So at this point, we have a brand new Ensemble instance, brand new application running on brand new IRIS 2020.1. And the next step would be in-place upgrade to, it was running on Ensemble 2018. And the next step would be upgrade to 2020.1. So firstly, we need to get ready for running the installer, and that would be prepare iris.key, unpack iris installer, and since this is Linux, we need to be mindful of user or group permissions. And after all of this was done, we take snapshot. And then it's time to run iris installer. Firstly, we shut down Caché, and then we run iris installer. We choose the conversion options and just let it run. After iris is installed, we need to convert the CSP gateway to the new web gateway. And that is as easy as replace the CSP library files and then restart Apache. So at this point, we have iris ready, we have web server ready. It's time to refresh the application classes. So we firstly make iris lib rewrite, and we need to switch to the correct OS user or the same user that runs iris. And then we switch into the application namespace. We call some iris system command, upgrade, and compile all. And remember that we need to ensure the code compatibility. So we use the set qualifier command, and we set the export version to Caché 2018.1. And finally, we make iris lib read-only again. So at this point, iris migration was done. And the rest, we need to think about, do we need to upgrade dependent technologies as well? And finally, we do testing again. So if we do group preparation, the migration should go very smoothly. But we also encounter a few small issues or general issues. We list them here as miscellaneous considerations. The first one is security setting migration. When we import the security setting into IRIS, we got an error that says unexpected tag in XML input. And after some research, we found that security setting export and import is never supported between versions. So what should we do? Our workaround is we need to install the intermediate Caché version, the same Caché version, and we import the security settings. Then we in place upgrade that Caché instance into IRIS, and then we export to get an IRIS version of security setting again. Another issue is the security settings. It will actually import the file system path from the old machine. And if we are in the new machine, that means the file system path might be different. So one example is the CSP physical path. So after we do the security import, we need to check the CSP physical path and make modification if required. Another issue is global name. So if the application interacts with globals named by Caché or IRIS, that would be an issue. An example is localization. So in Caché, it's using Caché message globals. But in IRIS, it's now iris.message. If we want to keep all data from the Caché instance, we need to merge the two globals to get all data. Another example is temporary globals. In Caché, it was called Caché temp, and in IRIS, it's now iris.temp. So we need to think about this. And then connectivity issues. If the application is connected from other Caché application, ODBC or JDBC driver on that system might need to be updated. On that Caché system, might need to be updated to IRIS driver. And if this IRIS system is connecting to Caché application, then we might need to download additional Caché driver and configure it again. So the final one is same-site cookies. In recent IRIS version and recent Caché version, it now supports a new same-site cookie scope settings. And by default, it's default to strict, which means the application doesn't send cookies with cross-site request. So if our application relies on some cross-site session cookies, like CSP session cookies, that would be an issue because the cookie wouldn't be sent out. And in this case, we need to set it to lags.
I'm curious, I should have asked this earlier. How many here are primarily database admins or operating system admin, or kind of the admin layer, versus application developer? So I'm curious. Both. Yeah, a lot of both. For our team, we end up being both. We work closely with our team that manages our operating system and share responsibility for the instance level. Yeah, so at this point, we're going to go towards some of the issues that we encountered in the mindset that we had. Yeah?
One question. So
Yeah.
what we're going through, and it's been advised of us, is I'm actually going through and upgrading all the CSP stacks. So like we have multiple CSPs sitting on top of the database. So I want to go through and replace that whole layer with web gateway containers, because now
That's
2021, 2022, CSP becomes web gateway. It's still CSP.ini though, so it's cool. And then we replace that whole stack because web gateway is backwards compatible with Caché. And I would assume Ensemble as well. We don't have Ensemble. So I removed that whole layer of the upgrade cutover by going through and doing that beforehand. So
Yeah.
Didn't see it called out there, so I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, that's good. I think perhaps in our case we were able to arrange our downtime most efficiently by kind of doing it all at once. But I think, yeah, that's a good point. If you can just replace the web server level separately.
Well, and I mean, there's advantages to us because we're still in 2017, 2018 web servers, which has Apache securities on us saying, hey, we need to upgrade Apache. And it's like, well, if we're going to upgrade Apache, why not just go through and do the whole thing?
Yeah, makes sense. So yeah, as we go to some of the more application level issues that we encountered, I want to highlight testing. This is something that's our group is very passionate about. So we have kind of a couple categories. Manual testing we found to be really important. So we keep kind of an application wiki for each app that has manual testing steps. This is just great for catching things in the app that aren't working the way that users will expect them to be. Yeah, we had a very high correlation between apps where we didn't have as much manual testing in place and issues that arose. We use the %unit test package built in with Caché and IRIS for automated unit testing. And this is really just invaluable for testing the breadth of your applications. Yeah, so that's a lot of work of kind of a culture of development, but something that has been great for us and we'd recommend. And this isn't really iris conversion related, but we use Jenkins for continuous integration. So that's just something that we have set up where we're constantly running our unit tests, so we're actually using them and getting feedback as we develop our apps. So yeah, on these topics, we'd love to talk to, if it's something you're interested in, we'd love to talk to you more either here or on the developer community. We've put out a lot of articles and could connect with you there. Yeah, so a few examples of debugging things that came up in our apps. Again, overall, migrations have been smooth, but these are a couple things we ran into. So on one application, I want to highlight a couple points. First, that legacy applications with legacy code often make assumptions that were true at the time, but weren't really good assumptions. These are weak spots for any migration, but maybe particularly during your iris conversion. And second, that good automated testing is just invaluable for catching minor regressions across your application. So turning to the code here, I have a lookup function that our application used, and this function could take a wider range of user inputs, different user types in different contexts, and return different results. And you'll notice right up front, we're not checking SQL code, which is something you should do when you're using embedded SQL. If you look at the 2017 docs, it was documented there. You must check SQL code for embedded SQL. Latest IRIS docs has some more interesting information about that. Fortunately for this lookup method, we had a unit test that covered the wide range of different types of inputs. So after our conversion, we ran our unit tests and we got a single failure. This raised some eyebrows. Why would a single case fail? But anyway, that led us to look through this method and realize, yeah, we weren't using embedded SQL properly. Our code had made an assumption that was a poor assumption and caused an issue on upgrade. So thankfully, this was just a corner case of this method that we would not have caught without unit testing, but would have caused some user a lot of pain. A second example, again, I'm highlighting a legacy code base that has, I'll call it clever but questionable design choices. And in this case, we had a Zen UI. And after conversion, we saw that our selects weren't populating, weren't getting options. So we polished off our Zen knowledge and could see that these selects were being populated from a class query. That query was running an SQL function to check if the user was an admin. And in this case, it was directly looking at the %session variable. So that's a web context variable. That's something that IRIS provides to a process when it's handling a web request. As is a good debugging step for SQL, often ran that query in the management portal, and you can see that %session variable showed up again as undefined. So at this point, I did have a hunch of what might be happening, but I went to the IRIS migration guide, and I remembered under the performance improvements with IRIS, there's been a lot of work done in automated parallelization of queries. So the hunch was perhaps this query that was the application was assuming was running in a web context was no longer running in that process, but running in a parallelized separate process. And sure enough, there's a no parallel hint that we could add to that query that allowed our dropdowns to populate, since we were forcing it to run in process. So ultimately, this way of checking for if the user was an admin probably isn't the best design, but this was a legacy application. The implementation was sound, at least, so we were okay with this workaround.
A little bit quick review of what we discussed today. We started by preparation or considerations, and we divided them into 3 levels: application level, instance level, and OS level. And then we chart the path for migration. And then we see the real-life example of our IRIS migration experience. It includes 2 steps: OS migration plus IRIS conversion. Then we discuss some miscellaneous issues, and finally we see some examples of debugging and testing. Here we show a list of our general consideration checklist, and we list them here for reference. And here we take questions.
Are there any of your government clients that are using Vista? Have you encountered any problems?
Vista clients encountering problems, I don't know that. That would be outside of my knowledge.
So from an operations standpoint, like all the commands change on the back end. It's no longer C session, Caché, it's IRIS space session.
Yeah.
Caché. So I mean, like that's like a big thing that needs to be thought out and considered on this migration. And it's external apps typically that are using it, right?
Yeah.
So like all our monitoring stuff will switch over to REST once we get to IRIS. But right now, they're getting in old school, back end. So all the scripts had to be updated to go from, Caché.
Yeah.
It's a big find and replace on all your operations.
Just so we make sure the recording gets it, he highlights that any external script that's calling in to Caché with C session or anything, those are scripts that would need to be updated to use the corresponding IRIS session and whatnot. Yeah, that's a great point. That's something that, I guess our team doesn't use extensively, but in definitely some of you guys probably have, like you said, thousands of instances across.
Yeah, so what I've done with my upgrade scripts is I literally throw, it's all Linux, it's all backend, is I throw message of the day with a translation of all the different commands that our engineers are used to running. So C control list becomes IRIS control list, I think. And some of our best operators were laughing at me for changing that. And then now they've become dependent on it on some of our early migrations because, like I said, we have thousands of servers. So as we slow roll them all to IRIS, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Any other particular pain points that you guys have encountered in conversions?
And I mean, it wasn't pain; it was no one going in. So it's performed pretty well. I mean, yeah.
When we had trouble with
Long global names.
previously Caché didn't care, or the compiler didn't care, that you could actually define
Right.
the stored.
So I believe.
We had a handful of those. I forgot about
Yeah,
that.
I believe
Those were a while ago.
in older versions, it wouldn't enforce a maximum global name, but it would only use the truncated version, right? And yeah.
As a next step, if you are looking for help to migrate your system, we list 2 great documentation: how to migrate to InterSystems IRIS and InterSystems IRIS migration guide. We show the QR code there. This QR code can take you to the WRC documentation download site if you have a WRC account. And you can download those two documentation or view them there. Or you can just contact the WRC at support@intersystems.com. And we have great experts there to help you. And
I wanted to mention on the Vista question, there are support people at our Tuck Exchange and other that probably have more direct dealings with that and could probably talk about it. Yeah.
and this is us.
This is us, and thank you.
Thank you.